Hey everybody, just wanted to jump on real quick. I haven't done a live stream in a little bit, and I had a couple things because of so much feedback in the group and some emails I've gotten and Facebook messages from people about a few specific things I wanted to cover. So I've done a Facebook Live on here before about injuries. This comes up all the time, and what I wanted to do is circle the wagons a little bit. A quote from a post that I read a while ago, which somebody had said like, oh, this deserves a thread of its own, and I think that's right. But also just to talk about a couple other things regarding training and methodology, since those things have been coming up too. So basically this is all about the subject of injuries, specifically for training 40 plus jiu-jitsu, and also about generally what I consider to be bad training advice, or at the very best, reductive thinking training advice. But very, very common. So here's why I bring this up. When you're in a group of this size now, we're over 7,000 people, which is great. There's a lot of support. People are saying great things about it, so I'm very happy about that. But it's very easy, everyone, as the saying goes, like has an opinion. So there's tons of information, tons of advice being out there. Most of it is all well-meaning, but it's not all equal, right? And part of my job, I think, what I think of it from a coaching standpoint is to help, separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. So I'm not picking on anybody in particular. I'm certainly not mentioning any names, but I'm going to mention some of the things that I hear recurring over and over again when some of these posts come up about injuries or about training and methodology. As people talk about being sidelined from injuries, people talk about frustrations with their training progress and should I continue, and thinking about quitting and all this stuff. So let's get into it, all right? So I have basically 5 things I've identified as bad training advice having to do with injuries or training methodology. But first, let me just read one of the things that came up here from one of our members who's talking about, very representative of a lot of posts on here about I'm just getting so discouraged by constantly being sidelined by injuries. Okay, so here's my quote, my response to him. I'll just read it out for you so you don't have to look it up. This is a big part of the reason that I created the 40 plus BJJ series and also this group. Everyone's needs will be somewhat different, but generally speaking, you need to cover these bases. Number 1, developing a 40 plus technical strategy. So this includes developing a non-physical attribute-based game, as well as a style of play that works for your body and your mentality, okay, because that's important too. It's not just about am I flexible, inflexible, and am I tall, am I short? It also has to do with how you think. Your game is going to be an expression of your personality and mentality. You're not trying to copy your instructor's style or your favorite grappler's style. Huge mistake a lot of people make. Some of the best grapplers in the world right now, the most famous, respected people in the world, teach their students their style. Nobody will listen because they're some of the best in the world, so he comes into argument from authority, but I can tell you that's a mistake because you'll always have some studs that can do what you do that will be your proof statements, but you're leaving a lot of people behind. That's a separate conversation. And finally, one that does not put you in a position to be basically exacerbating your injuries, right? So you want to have a game that you design around your physical attributes that's also sustainable. So there are exceptions, but generally speaking, I don't advise older grapplers to develop an A game based on things like inversions, climbing arm bars, climbing triangles, things like that. Okay, number 2, strength and mobility. If you do jiu-jitsu, you're going to get a great full body workout, but you're also going to overdevelop your anterior chain, okay? The sitting, the driving, the typing on the computer, all these things we suffer from, right? Most martial arts and jiu-jitsu in particular, very anterior chain heavy. So you're going to take wear and tear on your joints. Rehab is great, but prehabilitation is even better. And the most important aspects to focus on are mobility. Now this is related to, but not to be confused with flexibility, and functional strength. And I always like to emphasize this does not mean just getting strong and mobile to support your jiu-jitsu practice. It means getting strong and mobile the right way by emphasizing proper posture, breathing, and body mechanics in everything you do. Okay, so as you guys know who actually have some of my material, especially in the Pillars series, my more recent stuff that I've been doing over the Pillars of Jiu-Jitsu series over the last year. The posture I've made huge emphasis on, because sometimes the biggest transitions, like overnight game changers you can have, can simply come from an adjustment in your posture in real time. And so that is huge. And you want to make sure that you maintain proper posture and mechanics in your supplemental training as well as in your jiu-jitsu, or you'll just exacerbate whatever injuries you might have due to compensation patterns and things like that. Okay? And number 3 is mental approach. So how you think about your training and technical development has a very direct correlation to long-term success, health, and longevity on the mat. I see a lot of older BJJ guys who train a lot, but they don't think very deeply about their practice. They repeat things they've heard from their instructors or from some famous instructor. They brag about beating younger guys with old man strength. They focus on moves instead of true technical refinement and game development, or they fall into kind of machismo patterns of thinking. See it all the time. So 40 plus, my program, my philosophy is not about being a jock or a caveman. It's about developing your best technical jiu-jitsu regardless of your age, so that even as physical capacity wanes, your technical ability and understanding increases. And you will have a much happier, healthier, and more satisfying relationship with the art for the rest of your life. Okay? And, in that I follow the philosophy of, the great Rickson Gracie. He's laid out a great map for us to follow in terms of taking fundamental jiu-jitsu and making it at the highest level. And congratulations to Rickson on just getting the red belt. I couldn't imagine a human being more deserving of that. All right, so now, having read the quote, let me get a little more specific as I'll kind of pull out of it some of the responses I heard, even on this thread where I wrote this originally, that I would consider to be bad training advice, okay? So, number 1, in response to this, people would say, take a leave, take Tylenol, take ibuprofen. All right, I'm not going to give you the whole spiel here. I'm not really scientifically qualified, but Google it. Long-term regular use of those things is just bad news, period, right? Look it up. All the research is there. Don't be a caveman. That is not the answer, right? Taking NSAIDs is not good for you. Now, even in this own thread, right underneath where I wrote this whole thing, somebody said, keep training. You will learn to ignore it. I've had all these problems, and I still do. Still training 4 times a week. Ibuprofen is your friend at night, okay? Like, again, I'm not picking on anybody individually. I know that the intention is good, but this is bad advice. If you are relying on pain medications to get through your practice, something is wrong with your practice, okay? Short term, around specific like acute injuries and things like that, you can make an argument for it, but other than that, stay away from it. It's not good long term for your body. Even after making the point, so number 2, even after making the point about the distinction between mobility and flexibility, a bunch of people jump on and say flexibility, okay? Flexibility has more to do with your muscles and connective tissue. Mobility has to do with more with like functional movement patterns. Again, you can do a little more research on your own on the distinction, but they are not the exact same thing. Most everybody through age will lose a certain degree of flexibility, but again, just because your muscles or your connective tissue allows you to, say, get into these high guard positions, doesn't mean that your spinal mobility is going to be able to prevent you from injury if, say, someone bigger and heavier than you starts to stack you, and now you're older, you've already accumulated some wear and tear, right? So you got to make different choices about how you're playing, like what your game style is, okay? Number 3, I still hear people all the time talking about this, this kind of chest-thumping pride. Guys that are 40s, 50s, even 60s talk about, these young guys can't keep up with my old man strength, right? Guys, big friggin' deal. Like, old man strength is garbage. Throw it out of your mind. There is such a thing, right? It has to do with physiological process. But if you're relying on that, it means your jiu-jitsu is shit, okay? Just because you can as who Jeff Goldblum said in Jurassic Park, right? Doesn't mean you should. You know, you're masking holes in your technique. So yeah, you might be able to put a beating on the younger guys for a time, but there is a price to be paid for all these things, for putting your body in these positions and over-relying on strength, right? There will be, you know, a check that will be cashed later in your development. And, you know, if you can still do that now, talk to me in 10 years. If you can still do it in 10, talk to me in 20. At some point, you're not going to be on the mat anymore, I guarantee you. And now let's start getting into training progress, frustrations around training, and methodology. So when we talk about this, I just had something up the other day that kind of really broke down the process of using what we call in my organization, SBG, the I method. We do this for every aspect of martial arts, striking, grappling, everything. It's universal. The I method progression as it pertains to training posture, pressure, possibilities. And I really broke it down, like in a way that, you know, I think would be very helpful if you followed it, like giving away some gold. And then you get responses like, ah, you don't need any of that, man, just train, okay? So let me talk about that for a second. If your response to a really careful, well-researched, as opposed to, like, when I talk about well-researched, I mean years and years of refinement, years and years of comparing notes with other coaches who are interested in the best way to do things and have a very scientific mindset, and looking at results across broad cross-sections of individuals of all different ages and physical abilities and things like that, and your response is, you don't need any of that, just train. You know, usually what that means is, again, it's total anti-intellectual, it's reductive, knee-jerk, but usually what's behind that is, I don't really want to have to think that hard. I personally just train and I've gotten good. You're making it too complicated. The thing is, if you follow this model, it's actually more simple and it cuts more directly. It just sounds more because you're actually breaking it down. But it's a more simple model than just show up to class, do a bunch of moves, okay, do a little drilling live, and then just roll, roll, roll. Some people can always get good doing that because they're already very coordinated, athletic, putting in tons of time on the mat, have the leisure of putting in tons of time on the mat. But you're talking about making everybody in the room better, right? There are objectively, mechanically better ways to do that than others. So just saying just train, usually there's something behind that, right? Like, I don't want to have to think, or, you know, I train with somebody who said something different and they're really good, or, you know, my dad can beat up your dad type of thing. So, you know, these identifications that take place. So people just don't want to have to think. They've kind of cut themselves off to possibilities. And yet people who do go through this process, you know, see time and time again. I've had people who I've never met in person, many, many people who have plugged into this system, even if their particular academy doesn't do it. They'll get some supplemental training with a trusted training partner or a little group or something during open mats, or at somebody's house, and pull out the mats on the basement or something like that. And time again, you see these transformations that people just jump to another level, and they report this. So there is something to it. And don't just be one of those people that just goes, you don't need that, just train, okay? Hand in hand with that, this will be my fifth point about bad training advice, is, you know, somebody's talking about frustrations, people say, just ask your instructor, right? Now, in saying what I'm about to say, I'm not trying to position myself as being like this big know-it-all, like I know better than everybody else. But it's not without significance that over the years since I started 40 Plus, I've had many people write me confidentially about they train with so-and-so, very famous, way more famous than me, I'll tell you that right now, and saying, like, you know, this is how they train and I just can't do these things, or I just can't keep up. And I feel like there's a disconnect between where I'm at with my, say, physical capacity or what have you, and what all these guys are doing. And a lot of times this comes up for people that are 40 plus, 50 plus, so on and so forth. And this gets into things that most people don't think about. Like, sometimes the training approach in an academy is somewhat of a reflection of the instructor's personal goals and values. And again, that's sort of like copying somebody's style. There are drawbacks to that. for everybody else who doesn't match that prototype. So everyone says, oh, you know, jiu-jitsu's for everybody, we train everybody, it's, you know, family academy and all that stuff. But in reality, is it? If the instructor's goals and, you know, their philosophy for training personally is too specific, then it's going to alienate or at least trouble the goals and objectives of people who don't match that prototype. And so this is where things get into a problem. So sometimes, my point being, going to your instructor for advice could be gold for you, right? Sometimes you get them, they can zero rate on it, turn you around, give you a pep talk, give you suggestions to help you, but not always. Sometimes you need to say, like, and I'm not telling you, okay, just go leave your academy and all that stuff, like then you get in a whole other ball of wax. But sometimes it just means you need to take responsibility to think for yourself a little bit, and you need to, again, maybe do some supplemental work, have a conversation with your instructor about, you know, modifying some things without obviously disrupting the class format, just saying, you know, some of these things that we're doing, you know, I can't seem to physically do, you know, it's hurting my back, or I've got, you know, bad, like, I've had knee surgery and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, doing some work on your own, following some of these methodologies, can bring you along without having to make a big move like saying, okay, I'm going to quit my academy because the way these guys train. You don't necessarily need to do that, especially if you feel like you have a home there, you have developed relationships and friends with your training partners, all those things. You are responsible, though, sometimes for working within what you have and making the adjustments so that you can stay, you know, doing some isolation work, getting some, you know, some drilling time on the things that are the fundamentals that will allow you to develop your own game, if there's a significant percentage of what's being, you know, kind of what's going on during the class environment that is just not fitting you, okay? Like it's too specific, it's too much of like your instructor style or the senior student style. You know, it's too oriented around a specific game plan or set of attributes, right? Sometimes you just need to do the supplemental work yourself, grab some people who you know are going to be good training partners who are like-minded for your goals and objectives, and you put in some time on the side, right? And you can see big benefits. So hopefully that was helpful for everybody, and basically just have a critical mind. Avoid logical fallacies, right? Argument from authority, okay? So-and-so said this, they're famous, therefore, you know, who am I or who are you to question it, right? No. Actually look at the logic of what's being laid out here, and you know, look at the method, plug it in, understand it, and realize how there are ways to get so many more quality repetitions doing the things that are going to take you further, rather than just relying on, you know, cool techniques, volume of techniques that you know, technical sequences. Work on the fundamentals at a deep level, not on the level of basic techniques, okay, on the level of fundamentals of postures and pressures that emerge from the posture, whatever position you're in. And then at the end, there are the possibilities, and ultimately those possibilities are going to, the ones that work for your game are going to be driven by your mind, how you think, and wherever your body is at a certain time. And you never want to compensate with strength, and you never want to put yourself in a position to accumulate more wear and tear, because it will catch up, and you don't want to rely on things like old man strength. Okay? So anyway, that's enough for today, and I'll talk to you guys soon.